welcome back to the garage here at Sparrow's Nest. Look what's in today. We actually picked up some Rubicon Take Off Suspension items, shocks, springs, and such. So we are going to swap out the stock suspension for the Rubicon stock suspension and see how much of a lift we can get off of that. We may eventually put a bigger lift on her in order to get up to the 37s that are my dream. But for now, this will hopefully get us a little more clearance and make her just a little more prepared for some of that off-road stuff.
So to start off, we are going to get some measurements on where she sits now. As she sits, we're looking at 20 1/4 inches. That's 20 1/4 inches in the front from hub center to fender. About 22 3/8 in the rear. We're going to start taking this thing apart. I think I'm going to start with the front and take off the springs, take off the shocks, put the new ones on. One thing about that is they're actually different compression, different springs for each side, and different springs for the front and rear. So we've got 4 springs. Each one of them has a very specific point. So what I'm going to have to do is actually look at the old ones, and I'm going to show you exactly how I'm going to figure that out here in just a second.
Stay tuned. Giant.
So I can demonstrate what I mean with the new Rubicon springs we're putting on. Now these aren't new, they're takeoff. If I remember right, this guy had like 200 miles on his Jeep when he took these off. He went to an AEV, American Expedition Vehicles upgrade. Great company, but we got these super cheap. You see the numbers there, there's 339 AC and 340 AC. I've also got in the rears, I've got 450 AB and 451 AC. The higher the numbers, the stiffer the compression rate. So what that means is if the gas tank sits more to the passenger side, you're going to have a stiffer compression rate on this passenger side. If more of the engine weight sits on the driver's side, you're going to have a stiffer compression rate on the driver's side. What I'm going to do, because that all varies dependent upon options on the vehicle, as I take these off, I'm going to compare the old spring rates based on that sticker to the new ones. And if that sticker has ripped off in our previous wheeling trips, it's possible because we did take it out pretty much immediately after getting it. Then we're going to throw them on with the assumption that passenger side needs stiffer, and if I let it down and one side's sitting lower than the other, I'd have to lift it back up and swap them around. Let's hope it doesn't go that route. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this nut off. What this nut is the bracket for the brake lines, and we're going to have to lower the axle for this. And to do that, we might be lowering it far enough that was just a distraction, sorry. We might be lowering it far enough that we could break our brake line. So we're going to loosen that up so that they have a little more stretch. And then when we lower the axle, we can get this spring out of here. But the other things we're going to do, we're going to remove this bolt for this shock. There's another one up top here behind this plastic. So we're probably going to pull this plastic out. And then we're going to drop out this spring. I believe we may have to pull the sway bar here, pull the end link, so that we can just get a little bit more droop. Because the more droop we have, the better time we're going to have getting the springs in and out. Getting this spring out will be easier than getting the old or the new one in, I think. But like I said, first things first, let's remove this. One of the beauties of working on a newer vehicle, I'm used to rusty bolts. That just came so easy and I'm happy. I'm going to pull this off, and then I'm going to remove the bracket. And I'm just going to stick the nut right back on that bolt. That way I don't lose the nut, I don't get it confused with other stuff, and everything should be hunky-dory.
Yes, folks, he did say hunky-dory.
Hunky-dory.
That pine needle
Where,
up on top of it.
Yes, we have wheeled this thing. It's not a pavement princess.
Is anyone impressed with my contraption for seeing in this tight spot?
I like that. Feel around up there again. I do believe it's just the bolt. It feels almost like the nut is welded to the frame. And I just found where it is. It's round. So I'm going to assume that's actually just like a welded on nut.
Is that going to be a problem?
No, I mean that'll be a whole lot easier because then I don't have to get the nut back in place. I just have to get the bolt in. That'll be perfect, actually.
Oh, okay, I see. I don't understand a lot of these car terms, folks. I'm trying.
I'm not sure that's a car term. I'm just trying to describe what I'm feeling.
I don't always understand my husband, folks, but I'm trying.
That goes both ways. Second bolt. Second bolt is the top. The longer one is the top. But shock is out. So there are two types of shocks that go on this, and I can show you over here. Over here you'll see that two of these shocks have this rubber sticking out here of the bushing. The other two, the bushing doesn't stick out a lot. So these two are the fronts, those two are the rears. A lot of people, when they're selling the Rubicon Takeoffs, because they've switched to quick disconnect sway bar links, they will, or longer sway bar links for the lift, they will quite often try and sell these with the kit. Don't worry about that. I looked them up. It's the same part number, so you're not actually getting anything out of them other than spare parts that someone else doesn't want. All you need are the springs and shocks. The sway bar links are the same on the Rubicon as they are on the Sport and the Overland. I don't know about the Mojave.
Or the Willies.
Or the Willies. I'm going to recommend while you're doing this, either one, be careful not to touch your brakes, or two, make sure that you spray down your brakes with brake clean afterward. One of the worst things that can happen to brakes is finger greases, skin greases. You don't think you're that greasy, but just a little bit of grease off your skin will heat up on these rotors. And that's actually what quite often causes rotors to warp. And that will be why your vehicle shakes when you brake. I might take the bottom one off instead of the top. I'm not actually gaining any progress on that. May come back with some vice grips and tighten that down or something. This also appears to be 18 millimeter. This one though, I can see the nut and the bolt are made to come off. So we're actually removing the lower end of the sway bar link, not the top. I'll have to do some research to see what's going on with that top link. I saw someone on another post. I actually don't want the deep well socket for this one. It's getting in the way. But I saw someone on a post online saying something about they fought with their sway bar link for a while before realizing such and such and such. And I wasn't really thinking about it at the time, so I wasn't paying attention. But I now see that it was probably something I wanted to know.
Isn't that usually the case?
Yes. Okay. These are handy. It's got a nut with a link. That way once you get it on, it just sets against the bracket. And all you have to do is tighten down this. You don't have to have a wrench on the other side. I don't know if I can say good enough things about these when they're new. Once they get old and rusty and stuff comes apart, sometimes you end up having to figure out how to deal with it. But in the meantime, that was super handy. And our sway bar link is loose. So what I'm going to do now is verify there aren't any spring clips on here that hold it in place. I don't see any. And then I will just drop this axle real nice and slow. I want to be careful about it because I don't want to knock anything out of alignment. I don't want to rip brake lines off or anything like that. And as I lower it, hopefully this spring will decompress and come loose, and then we can just work it out. Jen, I'm going to ask you to watch those brake lines for me and tell me if they get taut.
Where are the brake lines?
These things. One's a brake line and one, I believe.
Okay.
One is a brake line and the other, I believe, is maybe the wheel speed sensor.
All right.
Okay, I am all the way down. That spring is still a little bit tight, so I'm going to put something under to block this side up a little bit, and then we're going to go release the other side, I believe. And get the whole thing down. Hopefully I have enough droop that I don't have to mess with it. This one might come out. We'll see. Oh man, it's so close. Man, it's so close. Okay, so we are going to try and drop the other side, droop the whole thing down. Still have plenty of brake lines, so I don't have to worry about that. The other side, I won't have the articulation issue holding me up. So we're going to move over and start disassembling the other side as well. First though, I'm going to throw probably a couple blocks under this side, just so it doesn't drop on us while we're working on the other side and break something. Okay, so we're going to try and lower this axle nice and easy. Let's see if we can get these springs to drop out. Still have plenty of brake line. This spring is coming nice and loose. The axle is down. Spring is out. Spring is out. This one is a 325. We're jumping up to, oh, I'll have to look. I think it was a 339. Let's try and get the other one out, and then we can go from there. Okay, so one thing that helps, because there is a certain direction that these spin, one thing that helps is having this. This isolator here only goes one way. You can see the flat spot, and that fits nicely right on top of this flat spot here. You'll notice here that my axle has some give to it where I can push down. That is what's going to help me out here. Right now it's mostly being held up, it seems, by the track bar and possibly the drag link. But what that means is that there's only so far it's going to droop with the stock track bar. And to get enough to get this up in there, well, this one went. The other side I had to push down. This one just fell right into place. So I'm going to get under here, start jacking it back up again so I can get my sway bar link back on, get my shock back on, and then I'll move to the other side. But you'll notice on this, like I said, there is a spot where that spring sets right into, so the bottom coil will stop right at that dead end. And the rest should fit just nicely. You want to make sure that this seats in nicely into place, and that this seats nicely into place. And then as I lift it, at some point, it's going to settle in. At some point, I'm going to reach my sway bar. And when I do, I'll throw that bolt back in. And then I will get to work on the shocks. Okay, so these Fox Rubicon shocks. They are the factory ones, come from Mopar. I did check, both fronts have the exact same part numbers, so it doesn't matter which side's which. I haven't checked the rears to see if they have different compression ratios or anything, but I'm going to throw these back on and tighten everything down and be done with the front. One strange thing worth noting would be the shocks. If you go back to the earlier video, you would find that the original equipment stocks, well, these are OEM as well, but the sport shocks actually have the cover, the plastic cover, on the top and the cylinder on the bottom. The Rubicon shocks have the same bushing that goes in the top, on the top. And if you look at pictures of Rubicons, the cylinder is actually on the top. You can see it behind the tire. These shocks actually sit the opposite way of the sport shocks. But we're going to get them in. Let's get this in place and I'll lift it right up till the holes line up. Almost there. That might do it. I think I'm going to need one more crank. Maybe not. Oh, yep. There we go. It's in. They say this is maybe a 3 to 4 hour job to get it all done. I'm going to say that's probably a safe bet. Speaking of dumb ways to do it, yes, I'm using a crescent wrench, monkey wrench, adjustable wrench, whatever you want to call it. And I know that is not ideal for maintaining the quality of your nuts, so to say. But I am, as I always say, using what I have. I do not have an 18 millimeter box end wrench. Okay, starting to feel a little tension, so I'm going to get my torque wrench set to the correct specs. 75 for the lower, 80 for the top, And we'll get this cranked down.
I'm back. Did everybody miss my mad camera skills? I know you did. It's okay. You don't have to say it.
Okay, so we're starting with the passenger side, but I did rotate the tires. What I'm doing is a front to rear, rears cross to the front pattern. So starting back into shocks and springs. This spring is a little different. You'll see actually that the small coil is on the bottom on this one, which is reverse of what it was on the front. Also, the sway bar itself, this is pretty common on trucks. The sway bar is actually connected to the axle instead of the frame, whereas on the front, the sway bar is quite typically connected to the frame and the links are connected to the axle. I'm going to start with the lower shock bolt here. It is much larger bolt. This is a 21 millimeter. Okay, so the top bolt on this one does have a nut on the back side. I'm going to try and see if I can get my wrench up in there. Hopefully, I might have to get a smaller wrench, but I just love the leverage on this big sucker because it means I don't have to fight this while I'm fighting the actual bolt. Okay.
Oh, Bailey, you're so helpful. Break. My dog is sniffing the underside of the truck. Bailey.
Okay, so I am going to pull the sway bar links off of the frame on both sides so that I get enough droop that I'm not fighting the sway bar to get those springs out. The further I can drop this axle, the happier I will be and the easier they will come out. Now, with that in mind, there's nowhere I see where I can really drop out the brake lines without removing the brake lines and then having to bleed the brakes. I don't want to mess with all that. I am not the best at bleeding brakes. I know the process. I think I just don't have the patience because I can get them. I just can never get them great. The beauty of this bolt is that the back side is a threaded nut, so to speak, that is actually welded to the frame, so you don't have to get anything on it. Just crank on the bolt and pull it out. If you are replacing the sway bar links, say you're doing a lift kit, these bottom ones actually have a Torx, I believe it's a Torx 25 head inside the bolt. So then you can get onto the nut itself to break it free. If you just get on the nut with, say, a socket, the whole thing's just going to spin on you.
We've experienced that with a certain TJ.
Okay, I was originally thinking I was just going to do one side, but I'm going to do the other side because that'll just free up this axle almost completely. There's a 4-link suspension. But the rear end it's got long enough control arms that it's got quite a bit of flex articulation from the factory. And I'm kind of counting on that to help me out in dropping these springs out.
Alright, so you're going to be lowering that and watching
the springs and the brake lines. I'm going to lower this axle. And that seems to be its natural point of droop. I'm going to leave this jack under it. And I may have to push down on the axle to release those springs. I don't know. We will find out. The track bar seems to be the one thing that's really holding it up right now. I don't want to have to release that. I watched another video where the guys did have to release that to get these springs out. If that comes to be the case, then so be it. How far are they? Boom!
Nice job. Okay, so we've got both of the springs out and we're working on loading this passenger rear one back in. Oops.
The fun part here is that you have to keep that coil isolator on the top while trying to fight it all into place. And keep it lined up with the spring. And keep it lined up with the coil buckets. Wait. I did figure out the other side had 438s before. This one had 439s. Now I've got 450 and 451. What the actual spring compression rate is, I don't know. Manufacturers aren't typically as open about that kind of thing, but if you can find it, cool. I would be curious to know. Like you can find it now on some of the older XJ and TJ springs. Whether it's out for the JT, I don't know. We've still got to get the other side in, then we'll start putting the shocks back in. But let's show you what we're doing over here. This side, just got to get the bolt started. And the plastic inner fender is a little bit of a pain in the butt. Now, one thing I'd like to point out, everyone is going to have a little bit different lift heights out of doing a project like this, because the spring compression rates, like I've shown you, are going to be different on each Jeep depending on what options there were, whether you had the max toe, whether you had the steel bumper or the plastic bumper, etc., etc. And because of that, your springs may be stiffer closer to the Rubicon springs, or maybe the Rubicon springs you get won't be quite as stiff as the ones we got. I'm pretty happy with the ones we got because from what I can tell, they're not the heaviest compression rate that Jeep has, but they're pretty darn close. I think there is, like for the rear, I think there is one heavier rating than the one we got. And I'm guessing that's for a Rubicon with maybe the steel bumper. I don't know. That is kind of tight enough that after that I'm going to want to torque it. So I'll get things in place and get the bottom. Okay. So sway bar, getting that bolted back in is going to be important. It was 60 foot-pounds on the sway bar bolt, 75 on the lower shock bolt, and 80 on the upper shock bolt.
Blah, blah, blah numbers.
I don't know where I lost my nut.
Women never have that problem.
So what we're going to do as soon as I get this dropped down is verify the measurements on center of the hub to the fender. Okay, so initial measurement we got here is 21.5. Our original measurement was 20.25, I believe. I'll double check that. If that is correct, then we gained about 1.25 inches initially, as long as nothing settles. Normally you would expect springs to settle. These aren't brand new springs, they've already been on a Gladiator, so I don't know if that's going to be the case or not. I don't remember the measurement on this one. Right now I've got 23.25, 23 3/8. It seems like it was 22 3/8 before, but if that's the case, inch in the back. Once again, I'll double check those and put the accurate numbers in the video here. And I'll double check tomorrow after driving it to work and torquing everything down. And if it changes, I'll add that here as well. And in the meantime, though, if you've seen our previous videos, some of our clearance issues with the breakover angle and the exit angle hitting this hitch have been issues. And this seems like a really cheap way, because this was something that someone had a lift put on and they were just trying to get rid of old parts. To us, this is a super cheap way to get a little bit of extra clearance. I guess that's it for tonight. They do say about 3 to 4 hours is what you can expect from this. I think that's what we got in it, probably 3.5, if you take out the time that we stopped to talk to family and to let the dogs out and whatever else. Funny story, while I was down here, Bailey started barking up a storm. Keeping in mind that Libertas is parked right outside this door. And it was his very obvious, there's someone here bark. So I ran upstairs. Jen stopped doing dishes at the back window right above Libertas. And we both ran to the front door to see what was going on. I opened the front door, look around, I don't see anything. Okay, Bailey, I don't know what you're up to, but we don't see anything. So thanks for barking at a squirrel. And went back to it. And then about an hour later, we noticed a friend posted a picture photobombing Libertas out in the driveway. He was here. He was right outside that door, and I ran upstairs to see what Bailey was barking at.
Our favorite stalker strikes again.
So it's tomorrow. I drove this thing to work today. I stole Jen's Jeep. Yes, I did. Drove it to work today. Took the bounciest road on the way to work there and back. Try and get everything shook into place. And then when I got home, I brought it in to retorque everything and to get a final measurement. The final measurement was the same as the previous measurement, the measurement after install yesterday. What I realized when I started to do the math is that I can't use the front bumper or rear hitch numbers because I let air out of the tires after getting my initial measurements. But based upon the hub to fender flare measurements, this gained us 1.25 inches in the front and 1 inch in the rear. So from what I've seen, everyone's gaining different amounts from this, and then like I said earlier, that's based on the springs, the spring rates you're taking out, the spring rates you're putting back in. For us, it was 1.25 inches in the front, inch and 1 inch in the rear, so it was a little bit of a leveler. I don't know. I'm happy with it. An extra inch. Actually, one of the guys at work today said, did you lift this thing? So it's noticeable, and that's an extra inch that we have clearance off-road. Plus, I think we could throw 35s on this now as is and not have to worry. Not have to worry about rubbing, and that would gain us another inch of clearance. So, all in all, pretty happy with this. I think if I do the math, it's about $1,000 worth of Mopar parts that we got for $200 because someone was just getting rid of them. So, good deal. Now back to previously recorded video. Thanks for watching, y'all. If you have done this and you have specific numbers you've gained, especially if you have the numbers of the springs that you put in versus the springs you took out, throw them in the comments so anyone else that might be looking at this option can compare what they might be finding. In the meantime, y'all have a great and Merry Christmas. The Lord bless you and keep you.